Now I know most of you are going to have an abundance of sourdough proving baskets out there, but for those of you who don't, or for those of you that may need a few more from time to time, then this video is going to be useful for you. And for sure, it's just good fun. I'll show you how to make a basket just with a cloth and some clothes pegs. We use a really simple sourdough technique as well. Now, for those of you who haven't tuned in before, my name's Philip. Great to have everybody watching along. Let's get baking. So in today's video, I'm kind of continuing the theme of working with a lower hydration dough. And that's really to continue helping out the beginners who are watching, or for people who just don't like dealing with sticky dough. You know, it's okay to knock that water content back. We don't need to work with higher hydration doughs all of the time to achieve a really good loaf of sourdough. Now I'll run through the ingredients very quickly, and then I'd like to answer just a few questions I got from last week's video. So in my bowl, I've got 235 grams of water, and I'm adding in 12 grams of sea salt, and I'll give it a really good stir with a spoon just to make sure that all of the salt is dissolved. And then I'm going to add in 130 grams of my starter. Now that's recently been fed and it's nice and active. And then to the bowl, I'm going to add in 375 grams of a strong flour. Now mine's got a protein content of 13.2%. Now I talked more about flour and hydration in last week's video, so if you're interested, I'll link that in a card above. And then we just need to give everything a really good mix, just to make sure the water and the flour and everything's really well combined. Right, so I got a question from David, or from David, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, but he asked me if I'm doing any stretching or folding during my 8 hours bulk ferment. And the answer to that is quite simply, no, I'm not. Time is all we need for this, and you're going to see a bit later in the video the gluten development we get when we just leave this to ferment for a good period of time. Now I've got nothing against stretching and folding, and if you enjoy doing it, then continue, there's no problem whatsoever. But personally, no, I'm not stretching and folding. And one from Vincent, he said that the salt content in my recipe was really high. Now I'm not quite sure about his calculations, they don't quite look like they're from my recipe, but nonetheless, if you find the salt content too high, then quite simply reduce it. You don't have to worry about following these recipes to the letter, you can make them your own. And Tara asks, if I do not have a Challenger baking pan, what else do you suggest for baking bread? Well, that's quite simple. You don't need any specialist equipment at all. You can bake it directly on the oven shelf if you want. Now, I'll link to my no knead sourdough bread recipe video in the description, because that will show you how to do it with a stone or a baking steel and directly in the oven without anything whatsoever. You know, don't let equipment hold you up. Really, some of these things are just a pleasure to have, but you can get back to basics when it comes to baking bread. Right, so I hope that answers a few of your questions, and if you've got any questions about this video or any of my previous ones, then do let me know in the comments and I'll get back to you. Right, now we don't need to go crazy on this mixing at the moment, we just want to make sure that everything's really well incorporated. Then we're going to cover it with a plastic bag, we're going to leave it out at room temperature on the side just to rest, just to let that flour get hydrated by the water. Now, I'll leave this for 20 to 30 minutes, but don't stress over the time. If you've only got 15, that will work fine. And if you have to let it go for half an hour, that's going to be absolutely fine too. Right, now that's done, we can get this flipped out onto our bench. We don't need any bench flour whatsoever. And then just using the heel of our hand, we're just going to give this a quick knead. And it's mainly to make sure that that starter's well distributed through the other ingredients, because it's quite glutinous. Now, although we're kneading it, the aim isn't really to build up any gluten structure. That's going to happen naturally during the bulk ferment. So once I've worked this through for a couple of minutes, I'm just going to pop it into my bowl. I'm going to cover it. Now in my case, my kitchen's 18 degrees Celsius or 65 degrees Fahrenheit, and I can leave this out for 8 hours overnight and it's going to be perfect to bake in the morning. But if your kitchen's colder, then obviously this process is going to take longer. And if your kitchen's warmer, then well, you may need to slow this down by popping it in the fridge. But you're going to have to judge that, and you're going to have to work according to your temperatures. Right, so here we are the next day. Good morning, everybody. And here's our dough. Now I popped it in the plastic container just because it's easier for me to prove. And here you can see we've got fantastic gluten development, and we've got that really just by leaving it. I mean, I did knead it for a minute or two just to make sure that starter was well distributed, but that's a great looking bit of dough. And now all we need to do is get this straight out onto our work surface. Again, no bench flour whatsoever. Okay, so now we're going to do the first of two shapes, what's called a pre-shape. And basically I'm going to take the dough and I just roll it over on itself flip it over, turning it 90 degrees, and then roll it back on itself again. I'm going to cover this with the plastic container. You can pop it in a bowl and use a bag, it's up to you. But then this is going to sit out on my work surface for about 10 to 15 minutes, just so the dough can relax and it's easier for us to do the final shape. Right, now it's time to make that cloth basket, and I've just got an ordinary kitchen cloth. It's got quite a fine weave on it, and basically I've folded it in half and then in half again, so I've got quarter of the size. And then you just want to take some flour and rub it into the material quite well so we make sure that dough doesn't stick. Right, so take your piece of dough, and then using the flour, we just want to give it a quick dust on the smooth side. Not too much flour, just enough to stop it sticking to the side. Pop it down, and now we're just basically going to roll a big sausage. So take the piece that's furthest away and start rolling it towards yourself. And as you roll it over, I like to imagine that we push it back forward again, just pushing the air into the sausage shape. And from time to time, you can just take the ends and tuck those in so we get a really nice shape. And as I'm rolling it back, I'm pushing the seam down to make sure that it's well sealed. I'll keep going to the end, and then I'll push the seam down once more. So we've got a really nice seal and a nice tight shape. Okay, so here I've just turned it round so it's easier for you to see what I'm doing, but basically you can see I'm just rolling it over, and then I'm using my fingers to make sure that that dough is well sealed down, it's well stuck down. Grab your bench flour, give the surface of the dough a good dusting, and then we can pick that dough up and gently pop it onto our dusted kitchen cloth. Right, this is going to be a bit tricky to explain, but I'll give it a damn good go. Right, I'm going to use some clothes pegs here, but you could use elastic bands or some string to tie the ends. But basically, I'm going to take the shorter end, I'm going to fold it up towards the dough and then back over in half, and then pinch the two sides together, and then I'm going to close that up with one clothes peg, and then I'm going to go to the other end and I'm going to repeat the same thing. And then after that, you can just kind of balance the cloth up if you need to and just adjust the pegs where necessary. And then you've just got this perfect kind of homemade basket, which I think is pretty cool. And I've really had great fun playing around with this. And once you've performed your origami on your cloth, this is going to prove like any other piece of dough, and at my kitchen temperature this is going to take somewhere between 45 minutes and 1 hour covered at room temperature. Right, so my dough actually proved for 1 hour, and I think I overshot it slightly. I think 45 minutes would have been spot on. Now I'm going to be baking this in my Challenger bread pan, and that's been preheating in my oven at 250 degrees Celsius or 480 degrees Fahrenheit for about the last hour, and I've just reduced that temperature to 220 degrees Celsius or 430 degrees Fahrenheit. Now I'm just going to give the top of the dough a light dusting, and I'm actually using a piece of cardboard. I'm sure we've all had Amazon deliveries lately, but I'm just using that as a homemade peel. You can just flip the dough out onto it, and then I'm going to open it up with a razor blade, or you could use a sharp knife, and then we'll gently transfer that to the Challenger pan and add a couple of ice cubes and pop on the lid. This is going to bake in the oven for 20 minutes covered and then 20 minutes uncovered, or until we've got the right colour on the outside.
Give me something good. I get wasted on the
So a simple solution to a problem if you find yourself kind of caught short with a basket. And listen, you know, there's absolutely no difference between baking this in a cloth or baking it in a basket. They prove exactly the same way. Though I would say on this loaf I was shooting for just a bit more of an ear, but no matter, that will still taste fantastic. Well listen guys, give this a whirl at home, it's great fun. Let me know in the comments what you think. If you upload any pics on Instagram, then obviously drop me a tag. But for now, I'd just like to say a huge thank you for watching. As ever, I'll see you again very soon. Stay tuned.